Really interesting stuff. We're almost there on day one of the sports summit, ladies and gentlemen, and our final guests I think we're saving two of the best for the very last. I'm looking forward to this one. We have the godfather of sports statistics here. His work has earned him a place on Time magazine's top 100 most influential people on the planet. He now works for the Boston Red Sox, and he's joined by an award-winning Financial Times journalist whose book on soccer pioneered the use of statistical analysis of the game. What we have here pretty much this evening at the RDS is Soccernomics meets Sabermetrics. Please welcome to the stage, a big Dublin warm welcome please, Simon Kuper and Bill James.
There are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap. And then there's us. We got to think differently.
Moneyball, the new film from Sony Pictures, details the Oakland A's success using a new approach to statistics. But how did that way of thinking get started? The seed was planted, oddly enough, by an aspiring writer in Kansas working nights at a pork and beans cannery.
I actually had 4 jobs. I was working as a night watchman, I was working at flipping hamburgers, I was working at a convenience store, and I was doing a little bit of teaching. The only thing I knew anything about was baseball, so I started writing about baseball.
Well, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Bill, for coming over from Kansas, where he's from. And it's hard to believe I'm sitting next to him because he's such a legendary figure that you start to suspect he doesn't really exist, but he does. And as we just saw, from being a janitor in a pork and beans plant, he then revolutionized baseball statistics, and really in baseball's wake, stats in all sports. All sports, soccer, cycling, everything have now become stats-driven. And the revolution started, you might say, in Kansas in the 1970s with Bill. Now, Bill's a contrarian. He's the sort of guy who, whenever anyone says something, he says, no, that's not true, or he thinks it isn't true. And baseball had this mountain of conventional wisdom. And he found new ways of measuring player performance that overturned a lot of that traditional wisdom. For example, it was always thought the way to gauge a hitter's quality was his batting average. And Bill found, no, it's how often he gets on base that's the crucial stat. And he found that a lot of traditional baseball ploys, like stealing bases or bunting, were just stupid. And he started publishing photocopied baseball abstracts with this kind of stuff in 1977. Not many people bought them, but they made an impact partly because Bill, I think, at bottom is a writer. He's a wonderful writer. And as a non-fiction writer, I would say is in the class of Michael Lewis and Malcolm Gladwell. And that's part of why he made this impact that he did. One of the people he made an impact on was John Henry, who is the owner of the Boston Red Sox and of Liverpool Football Club and is a longtime fan of Bill's. And he hired him to work for the Red Sox just over a decade ago. And Bill works for them mostly from home in Kansas, some of the time in Boston. Bill, can I start by asking you, what exactly do you do for the Red Sox?
I am a consultant for the Red Sox, basically. The Red Sox have issues that they have to deal with on a daily basis. Should we sign this player? Should we use this player in this way? Should we, here's a trade that's been offered us, what do you think? I try to stay out of things as long as I can because I find that you have the more impact on the debate when you join it much later. When you wait for everybody else to say what they have to say and join it as late as possible, people are more inclined to listen to you. So I try to stay out of things, which isn't my nature, by the way. Staying out of arguments is not my nature. But so I try to stay out of things as long as I can, and that way try to contribute when I'm asked.
Because you're part of a huge statistical operation at the Red Sox. Like most baseball clubs, they now employ hordes of statisticians.
Well, I know them individually, so I don't think of them as being hordes, but it is possible that if I started looking at them that way, it would be possible, yes.
Now, 20 years ago, the Oakland A's made a big impact, punched above their weight, because they were one of the first clubs, maybe the first club to adopt stats, be driven by stats. Now all clubs do that as far as I can see. So how easy is it to benefit from stats when everyone is doing it?
Easier than ever for this reason. There will never be a shortage of ignorance. There will always be things that we do not know, that if you can figure out how can we use the evidence available to figure out that, there's an advantage in it. It's true that the advantages are not where they were years ago. On the other hand, there are a lot more people looking for them. there's a lot more suggestions. So in a lot of ways it's and there's a lot more data. So it's a lot easier in many ways to find, and also we have all of the same problems we always had. The problem of overcoming resistance to how people assume that things should be done is still there. It's different. It's in a different place, but it's still there. So I definitely don't think it's harder to find advantages in analysis than it used to be. It may be in some ways easier.
I mean, baseball is a model and example not just for other sports, but also for other sectors, because we were talking about this earlier. Baseball's really maybe one of the very first sectors that picked up stats and used them to rethink its way of doing things. Why was baseball so ahead of the game in a way?
Well, it is a very, very orderly game. We talked about this also, but it's a static game, which stops. There's a state, and then you move to a different state, and you move to a different state. That's true of all sports, but baseball is very orderly. Baseball is the only sport in which players take turns. You don't have basketball would be quite different or soccer would be quite different if you had an instruction that this player kicks the ball to that player, to that player. Baseball does that. It's very, very orderly. Being very orderly made it ideal for record keeping. And in the 19th century, some people who started with cricket did a very, very good job of adapting record keeping to baseball, so that when the computer revolution started 100 years after that, we were ahead of the game. We had 100 years worth of really interesting data to play around with before when the analytical revolution started. And so the analytical revolution hit in baseball before it hit in places that sensibly you would think it would hit. Analytical revolution hit in baseball before it did in finance, for example, that made baseball sort of a paradigm of how this works.
One way it's a paradigm is it had to overcome a lot of resistance from stupid ex-professional players who said stats can't tell you who's a great ball player, or stats can't tell you who's got heart. And so there was this battle that I think in the end was mostly won over traditional pig ignorance. And now in soccer, that same battle is playing itself out 20 years later. What strategies would you advise the statistical people to use?
The number one strategy is never argue with anybody. Just simply ignore those people who disagree with you, who criticize you, who explain why you're wrong. Just ignore them and carry on as before. The people you can reach are the people who are listening. And you would not believe how many scouts come up to me who, suntan, old style language, played the game, and they will tell me, I was using your stuff way back in the 80s. I was always with you. Well, they were damn quiet about it at the time, but they were there. And there are people who are listening. And I'll guarantee you, in soccer, there are an awful lot of people who are listening now who are just being very quiet about it. So don't argue with the people who are attacking you. Just pay no attention to them and speak to those who are willing to listen to you. That would be my suggestion.
Although a lot of the best moments in your prose are when you laugh at Hall of Famers who say stupid things about stats.
Yeah, well, but I spend a lot of time apologizing for those things. So, I don't know.
Yeah, you were an outsider who became an insider.
That's
that
right.
Must have costs.
That's right. That's right.
You have to be much more polite now.
Well, I have to try to be much more polite. That's right. I have to work at it. It's an effort.
Speaking as an outsider for the moment who has the viewpoint of an insider, you work with John Henry. John Henry hired you. John Henry is a mighty man, not just in baseball, but in soccer. And my co-writer on Soccernomics, Stefan Szymanski, who's an economics professor at Michigan, he says John Henry's the only sports owner he's met who has more than just a headline interest in stats. He said John Henry will actually understand the stat, argue with you about it, try and understand it at a deeper level, and then not pay you for it. Is that your impression?
Well, he pays me for it.
He pays you. That's why he doesn't pay Stefan.
Yeah. But John does have a very... John could have had my job. I mean, if John had not had an ability to, with financial instruments, an ability to make an extremely good living with financial instruments, he could very well have been the person who made a living by analyzing baseball and explaining it to others. He does have an extremely deep interest in how the details that are reflected in statistics are tied into the higher level questions that you have to solve in order to make it work.
So you're part, thanks to him, of this mighty machine. You have this huge amount of resources that you didn't have 40 years ago. Where do you see it going? Where is baseball stats and sports stats going?
We're kind of in a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a holding pattern, but we're in digging out mode. And this is actually the third time in my career that this has happened. When the computer revolution first hit, you know, the Steve Jobs revolution in the early 1980s, for a while we were so buried in data that we didn't have any idea what it looked like from the outside. And we went through another cycle of that in about 2000, and we're in a third cycle of it, where the people who are good at generating new forms of information, for example, pitch tracking or field tracking, and I'm sure you have the same thing in soccer where you're tracking where the ball is hit, they're generating so much computerized information so rapidly that frankly we have no idea what it means.
Exactly the same in soccer, by the way.
Yeah, I would have guessed, yeah. And so where we are right now is in a long process of digging out from under these huge mountains of information so that we have an idea what they look like from the outside.
So the problem of big data is a curse rather than a blessing for now?
Not in the long run. In the long run it's a blessing, but for now it's kind of a, and also I resent that I'm not young enough to take more advantage of it. But for now it's kind of a problem.
You say you resent you are not young enough to take more advantage. You were on the outside sort of selling your baseball abstract to a few dozen people, being a cult figure. Would you rather have been, you know, age 25, age 30 like Theo Epstein, a big hire at a big club, getting a big salary to run an actual Major League Baseball club?
No, and I don't have the skills to do that, to be honest. And I never would have had the skills to do that. Even if those opportunities had been presented to me when I was 30, I couldn't have done them. I just don't have that ability to run a business or run an enterprise like that. You were nice enough to say that I was essentially a writer. I think no matter what you do, you have to have more than one skill to make it work. And I combine this deep interest in baseball and some understanding of how to study it statistically with some ability as a writer. But I never did have the skills that Theo has or that Ben Sherrington, who has that job now with us. I never did have that skill set, and I wasn't ever going to develop it.
I mean, you say you don't have that skill set. In fact, you're an English major.
Right.
And you've become...
also an economics major. Go ahead.
Also an economics major. Okay, fair enough. Very impressive. Nonetheless, not a statistician.
I'm not a statistician.
When I ran the phrase Bayesian prior by you earlier, it may have been my accent, but which I stole from Nate Silver's book, because I'm not a statistician either. I believe it was new to you.
I'm sorry, what? I missed...
the phrase Bayesian prior.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So, I mean, here you are, you're one of the world's most famous statisticians, and you didn't go to MIT, so how does that work?
Most people at MIT can't play baseball. Of course, I couldn't play baseball either. I think having that skill set is wonderful. I would love to have the skill set that MIT has. I also think the ability to make computers sing and dance the way my son can. My son's a software engineer. It'd be wonderful. I wish I could do those things, and I would be a lot better at my job than I am if I could do those things. I wish I could do those. I wish I had some idea what Bayesian analysis actually is, rather than just reading about it on Wikipedia every 6 months, so that I don't it's not quite as stupid. But I do have. Everybody has to take the skill set they have and do what they can with it, and that's what I've done.
But how do you do that? I mean, you came up with, at the time, the revolutionary figure of on-base percentage as a way of measuring a batter.
On-base percentage was around before me.
But You said it was
what
the
we
key.
did was to demonstrate its importance.
And that was revolutionary. That changed the way baseball players were hired. How do you do that without being able to work a computer, without being a statistician?
What we do, analysis is not statistics. Analysis is connecting the higher level questions to the lower level questions. The statistics are the details, and they tell you how often something happens. In order to analyze anything, you have to connect that set of questions. How often does this player steal a base? How often does that player drop a fly ball? You have to collect that set of questions to the highest level set of questions. Why do teams win? How much is this player worth? When you try to connect the highest level set of players questions to the lowest level set of questions that the statistics deal with, you realize that there are a lot of details that are missing. There are an awful lot of details that you just don't know. What enabled me to do what I was able to do is inventing ways to answer those little nagging questions that contributed some to the understanding the higher level questions. It's true that I was always I'm not only not a statistician, I'm also a very bad statistician. I'm sloppy, I'm impatient, I make mistakes and I don't care about them. If you don't believe me, I have critics, believe me, you can look that up. That's all true. But what enabled me to survive in my profession was that, and I'm not saying it's not important to be careful, I'm not saying it's not important to be accurate, I'm not saying it's not important to get those things right. It is important, it's just not by skill. But my skill was seeing the new things that people weren't measuring, but that we could measure. Being an English major is as helpful for that skill as being a statistician, I think.
So a big question, like not how often does Ricky Henderson steal a base, but is stealing bases actually a good idea?
Right.
That is a question, a good new question nobody had asked. And then how do we find the data to answer that question?
Right, exactly. And I'm sure the same is true in your sport, that there are very simple questions like that, which are as yet, it's still true in baseball. There are very simple questions like that, which are as yet unanswered, but which change your understanding when they are answered.
Well, one thing that people started to measure in soccer when we started to get data was tackles. How often does a defender tackle? And for a while, defenders were assessed on how many tackles they had. And then people started to say, actually, tackling is a really bad gauge of a defender. It's not true that good defenders tackle a lot and bad defenders don't tackle. So that stat was kind of discarded in a way that bunts say were also discarded as a measure of worth.
Right. Parallel in American football. In what Americans call football, we count tackles. But what you have to realize is if somebody's going to get tackled on every play, right? Every play ends, and most of them end when somebody is tackled. If your backfield is tackling people, your defensive backfield is tackling people, you're in deep trouble. So the question is who has the tackles, not how many of them are there.
Now, one group of people who are becoming very aware of stats are the players themselves. And this can change their incentives. For example, if you tell a player, you've got to make a lot of tackles, then he might focus because that's how we measure you, he will focus his game to make a lot of tackles, irrespective of whether that helps the team or not. Do you see that happening in American sports?
Oh, yeah. More of a problem less of a problem now than it used to be. In the 70s, when there was a more primitive understanding of what of the value of a lot of the stats, there was more of a problem with players seeking, stealing bases as an example, wanting the glory roll at the end of the bullpen to pile up saves because you got paid for having saves. As you develop more understanding and you measure more things, it becomes less of a problem that the players focus on those things that you happen to be measuring. So in my opinion, that's much less of a problem now than it was 30 years ago, but yeah, it's still there.
I mean, it's another way that stats have entered the conversation really all over, you know, from what we were just talking about, the previous panel was talking about TV broadcasts to the players' conversation. So stats are part of the conversation in sport, and you've become a kind of Arthurian legend off the back of that. Now, you are in every inch a skeptic and contrarian as far as I can read you from reading you. How do you read your own legend?
Well, those of you who are married will understand this. It is your wife's job to knock the scales off and keep you realistic and focused. And I have a wife who's pretty good at that.
That's an evasive answer, but give us the real answer.
You can't. Look, I'm very grateful for what baseball has enabled me to make a living. I'm very thankful that people appreciate my work. I think that I'm in no sense a phony. I think that I don't pretend to be anything I'm not. However, a lot of what people say about me isn't true, and I know it isn't true. But I'm not. It's not. People. I'm not smarter than anybody. I mean, people think I'm a lot smarter than I really am. I know I'm not. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not, but there is an awful lot that's written about me that just isn't true, and I know it isn't true.
Like what?
Well, it's mostly good stuff, so I'll let you just go.
Last couple of things, Bill, as we approach the end. I was reading your murder book, your perfect crime book, which is a very, very new departure, and was so compelling that I spent most of the flight here reading it. Why? Why from baseball to crime?
Since I worked for the Red Sox for years, it does somewhat constrain my ability to comment on this generation of players. I can't. I have to be really careful and say if somebody's a free agent, and I speak well of them, that can be interpreted to mean that the Red Sox like him. It can be used in his contract negotiations. He can say, you know, the Red Sox like me. So I have to be really careful about what I say about people if it's nice. I also have to be really, really careful about anything I say about players that's not nice, because it can wind up on a bulletin board somewhere, and you become part of the story. I become part of the story in ways that I shouldn't be part of the story and don't want to be part of the story. So I have to be really careful about what I say about baseball. I wanted to write about something else to have the opportunity to go back and say outrageous things again. I wanted to write about something where I didn't have to worry about whose toes I was stepping on. And I've always read these books, you know, these terrible books about horrible events that happen. They connect us to very basic questions about ourselves. Every crime that happens connects us to some part of ourselves that we spend most of our time hiding. And consequently, crimes have tremendous insights into the way we really are as the way that we pretend to be. And I've always been interested in it. I've read hundreds and hundreds of books about crimes, and I decided to write about them as well.
You ended up doing a kind of analytics of crime. For example, about serial killers, you say all serial killers are thieves, and serial killers who are married murderers who are married overwhelmingly are, no, let me get that right. Men who kill their wives overwhelmingly are having an affair.
Yes.
So you compile these analytics that, have echoes of baseball analytics.
And it is parallel. And crime has no data at all. And that gets back to what I was thinking. The same patterns of thought are useful in areas where there's no data. Baseball is very organized. Baseball always has been very organized, and I've been able to make a nice living out of the fact that baseball is so organized. But our thinking about crime is fantastically disorganized. So I just thought it might be a little bit of a contribution to the discussion to try to organize it a little bit.
But crime is now becoming organized, police is becoming organized about collecting data about crime. So a kind of moneyball of crime is happening where police departments do data maps, heat maps about where in the neighborhood crime happens and so on. That too is a kind of echo of the stats revolution in baseball.
Well, it hasn't having to do with stats revolution in baseball, but it seems to have because we got there first. It's a function of the computer revolution, the Steve Jobs revolution, the fact that we have data and are able to deal with it on such a level. And it's because baseball kind of got there first, and banking and other things. But baseball was one of the things that got there first. The ways that were worked out to deal with it in baseball have been analogized and used in every other sport. For example, somebody in putting this summit together decided to have this stuff blowing up. There has to be some reason that was done.
It would have been guts rather than numbers, I think.
You think?
That's my guess.
Yeah. I bet there's an analysis somewhere that gives a reason for that. But maybe it's, I don't know, who knows?
Well, increasingly, yeah. Every decision people make, like whether to eat that donut, is driven by stats and real-time collected computer data on their own body. Yeah.
It could be.
Yeah. So yeah, all these things are. But the book that popularized the stats revolution in baseball and helped spread it to other fields was not written by you. It was Moneyball by Michael Lewis. Do you have any feelings of jealousy or resentment about that?
Well, Moneyball is a great thing for me. I mean, and I know people won't believe this, but I never read the book. I read Michael Lewis, and I like Michael Lewis, but I don't read anything.
You've never read Moneyball?
I've never read Moneyball.
You're the only person in baseball who hasn't. Wow,
it could be. But I gather from the way that people talk about me that he was very nice to me. It was wonderful. It was wonderful for me. It helped my career immensely. And there's, do I ever resent the fact that he's a better writer than I am? Yes. But I'm pretty realistic about it.
No, I put you up there with him. Because reading the crime book, I was trying to work out what does Bill do right as a writer. And you have this formal grammar, and then the prose is American vernacular. So who did you get that from?
The mystery writer Ed McBain was certainly somebody I read since I was 10 years old. The economist Robert Samuelson is an economist now, has that name, but another economist a generation ago, who wrote extremely well about a man, I'm forgetting his first name, Dr. Fogel. The early writers about
Robert Fogel.
What's that?
Robert Fogel,
yes.
The economist. Right, yeah.
Early writers in econometrics who wrote well. I learned a lot from those guys.
So not someone like Mark Twain or H.L. Mencken?
Well,
everyone.
I think you have to be closer to Mark Twain than I am to learn from him.
Bill, what's next? Because you're a man of many parts. So I can't believe that crime is going to be enough for you.
I still write. We have a website, but we charge $3 a month to keep the riffraff out, and we do a good job of keeping the riffraff out. But I still write for that small audience. I'm writing a book about a horrible criminal who lived 100 years ago, and that's consuming a lot of my time. It's an absolutely dreadful story. I mean, much worse than popular crime. But it's also a compelling story and a very unusual story, so that's consuming a lot of my time.
And in sport, do you still have ambitions, or have you done it all?
I don't think that as you get older, you have less ambition, but you have less energy. And so the ratio of my ambitions to my energies is, I'm afraid, rising all the time.
Well, thank you very, very much, Bill, and thanks, everybody. I found that fascinating.
Thank you all.